Good morning, everyone. I am Ben Backwel. I am the CEO of the Global Wind Energy Council, and I am broadcasting from the GWEC studio here at Shoreham Port on the south coast of the UK. And I'm really pleased today to be joined by Nigel Topping, who is the COP26 High-Level Climate Action Champion. Nigel, you have been a very busy man recently.
Yeah, it was great to see you, Ben. I'm shame I can't see the sea behind you. It's in a lovely location there in Shoreham.
Great. Well, look, you are, officially the man who's out there promoting COP to the world. You recently just wrapped up the Race to Zero dialogues,
Yeah.
which is a very important initiative led by the high-level champions for global climate action. Can you explain what the Race to Zero initiative is and how it's relevant to our wind industry and renewables?
Yeah, well, so the Race to Zero is a global campaign to send a massive signal to politicians and policymakers ahead of COP26 that the whole of society is committing to getting to net zero as soon as possible. So particularly, that, of course, that means businesses, investors, cities, states and regions. And we launched it in June and we already doubled the number. So there's great momentum. And that triggers what we call the ambition loop. You know, when governments see hundreds and thousands of businesses and cities committing to net zero, it changes the politics. It makes it easier for them to be bold. You know, some of the recent, that's very relevant to the wind industry, and you know, some of the momentum from private sector has definitely encouraged some of the recent announcements in the UK and elsewhere of much more ambitious and levels of rollout of wind power. But the dialogues were about getting under the hood, if you like, of the headline targets to what does it actually take to get there in terms of what's the technology roadmap, how do we mobilize the finance, what are the policy levers to get there. So I think it's important that we don't just say we've got to get to zero, but that we have a clear roadmap. And so that's what we're really working on now with with the general on the supply side, with the kind of net zero commitments from more and more electric utilities, all of which include a lot of wind. So we had Ørsted, Iberdrola, SSE, and others in the dialogues. Also on the technology side, so the people like Siemens, but on the demand side as well, we think we have nearly 300 major global companies now demanding 100% renewable energy, and that both sends a sort of future demand signal to the industry, which gives confidence to invest, but it also sends a signal to policymakers that the private sector's demanding the transition. So what we're trying to do is get to Glasgow with the sense of the inevitability of the transition and the attractiveness of being involved in it.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly see momentum building and things becoming kind of unstoppable in many ways, which is what we all want to see. Now, obviously, COP was postponed to next year because of COVID-19. And I'd like to, on one hand, that leaves us with a kind of extra year to prepare. But obviously you haven't taken your foot off the accelerator, and we're also expecting countries to come out with their new national targets at the end of this year, and hopefully announce them at the Climate Ambition Summit. Can you kind of talk us through the process and what you're kind of expecting to see between now and next November?
Yeah, it's maybe important just to take a pause and say why this COP that the UK is presiding over, COP26, is so important. It's because the Paris Agreement was COP21, the Conference of the Parties. So the big global agreement was struck 5 years ago, and part of the mechanism which was set up was that every country has to submit a plan every 5 years. So the first plans were submitted 5 years ago. So the Climate Ambition Summit is literally on the 5th anniversary, the 12th of December, of the Paris Agreement being gavelled through. And so that's when countries should have submitted their new plans. But of course, given COVID, there's been a distraction for the health and economic crises in all governments. So we know that some governments will struggle and will not get their new plans through until next year. Nevertheless, there's good momentum now. We've had China recently commit to net zero in the 50s, Japan, South Korea, another two big economies. The UK and the EU had already committed, but we're looking for their headline figures to be announced by the 12th. And of course, the Biden victory means that the US will come back in, and we'd expect that to be followed with a net zero commitment from them. So I think now we've suddenly got a much stronger political tailwinds than even we could have imagined 2 months ago, and hopefully that will start to crystallize on the 12th of December, and then that gives us 11 months until the COP for other countries to come in, and for those who've already come in with maybe not such ambitious national plans to work to improve them.
So there's still, after the Climate Ambition Summit, there's still some room to work with countries ahead of COP to try and enhance or kind of improve their level of ambition.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, governments don't stop working for 11 months. So even if they've submitted a formal plan to the UN, there'll still be work going on and there's a lot of people working around the world, a lot of businesses, a lot of civil society, a lot of cities. And just in the dialogues, for example, Patricia Espinosa, who runs the UN climate program, reminded us that in the current plans, only 10% of them have details on how to decarbonize transport. It's kind of shocking, right? Given that transport's such a big chunk of emissions. So there's a lot of room for improvement still. And so there's nothing stopping a company or a country improving its commitments all the way to the last day of the Glasgow COP, right? So I think you'll see a lot happening in December and then a drip feed all the way up to Glasgow. And then as we get to Glasgow, I think some people will feel the pressure or want to take the stage and the glory of enhancing their ambitions still further.
Yeah, and of course, as you mentioned, with the Biden victory, we will see the US coming back into the process pretty soon. I mean, how soon can that be in real terms for you?
Well, I mean, formally, the US came out on the 4th of December, because that was 3 years after Trump announced it, and that's the process that it takes. And Biden has said that he will come back into the Paris Agreement on the first day of his presidency, so on the 20th or the 21st of January. And I think it's the 30-day lag. So formally, the US, if all that goes to plan, will be back into the Paris Agreement on the 21st of February or the 20th of February. Of course, Biden's just announced John Kerry as his climate envoy. And for those who don't know or don't remember, John Kerry was the Secretary of State under Obama and really led the climate diplomacy, traveling the world in the run-up to Paris, doing a lot of work, particularly with China and India. So John Kerry will have pretty much a zero learning curve. And I think, countries who value their trading and diplomatic relationships with the USA, but haven't been perhaps as ambitious as they might be on climate, can expect quite a lot of visits from Kerry and his team in the next 12 months or in the 10 months between. Well, no, he's already started, right? So that's in terms of not taking up the position, but in terms of working, that transition team's already in place.
Yeah, and for us, it's incredibly, kind of hopeful to look forward to a different kind of year next year with the US, fully engaged again. Now, we're very pleased with countries adopting net zero targets. China, South Korea, the European Union, other places. Now, from the wind industry point of view, what can people like yourselves do to make sure that these targets actually translate into action on the ground? I mean, one thing we found, particularly in the wind industry, is quite often, we have the investment, we have the kind of ability to be able to step things up, but it's very hard to actually get things done because of regulation that's not fit for purpose, or planning, or market design, those kind of issues. What can we do to make sure that kind of the targets and how you get to those targets is kind of enshrined in the agreements?
Yeah, I think there's two things really. One is to sell a really compelling story of the possible and likely future. I know that the IEA now has got more ambitious, like 2050 net zero scenarios that show us getting to 280 gigawatts of wind by 2030. But the IEA has consistently undercooked the potential of new technologies. And this is hardly a new technology now, but it's still evolving, right, and improving all the time in terms of generating capacity and in terms of cost. So I think making sure that, and this is something that we're trying to do in publishing a series of pathways that show, hopefully in rather simpler terms, and sometimes because ultimately we have to be able to tell a simple story and then back it up with detail, right? So sometimes we lead with the detail and then we miss the simple story, which is actually what ministers and CEOs. It's the classic elevator pitch, right? We need to get the elevator pitch right. Like, how much wind could we put into the world's grid by 2030, and how cheap can it get? So we've got to get those headlines right, because if we don't get those headlines right, so is that 280 gigawatts that the IEA are talking about right, or should it be 500 gigawatts? Because they've been out by orders of magnitude in the past. So I don't know, but and what costs can we reasonably expect to get to, and what sort of utilization factors can we expect to get to, and how can that penetration of intermittent renewables form the backbone of a 100% clean grid, given those other measures of like interconnectors, demand response management, and different sorts of storage, right? So how can we tell a story not just of wind, but of clean grids, getting there faster, getting there reliably, getting there at a good price point. So we need to get the macro narrative right, and then of course it tends to be more regional, right, Ben? We need to tell the story of what needs to happen to unleash the market in terms of market design, policy. Is it auctions? Is it feed-in tariffs still anywhere, or have we gone beyond that? Is it more now the overall grid design and the overall markets design to make sure that we get to clean grids much faster?
Yeah, we certainly echo your point around having the kind of big picture, laid out. And as you say, I mean, wind and other established technologies like solar are going to play the leading role from what we can see. But then, yeah, indeed, there's a lot of work to be done on the ground to follow up.
I mean, one thing that comes to mind, when I was on the Energy Transitions Commission and we published the Mission Possible report, one of the things which kind of we were all waking up to was the massive increase in the need for electrical power. So I think we also need to make sure we don't frame this as cleaning the current grid, but as cleaning the global energy system, because of course that means a much bigger power system, which means a much bigger role for wind, and that's also very related to the role of hydrogen, right, and green hydrogen in particular, which we, all the pathways show us we need green hydrogen for heavy trucking, for shipping via ammonia, and for some of the heavy industry process. So I don't think that message has really landed globally yet, that there's a lot more no regrets investment in renewables, right, because we just need much more power to decarbonize transport and to give us a green hydrogen to clean up so many other sectors. So I think that's the other bit of framing, that I don't think the power sector and the renewable sector have really been punchy enough yet in telling that story of a much bigger role for power in cleaning the energy system, rather than just decarbonizing the power system.
Yeah. So listen, I mean, I feel we have barely scratched the surface. It's great having you out there, Nigel, as a champion, for the energy transition and for our industry as well. We're looking forward to continuing to work with you and the rest of the COP26 team over the next year to really deliver something ambitious and transformational. So thanks very much for joining us this morning, Nigel.
Thanks, Ben. It's a pleasure.
Great. Okay, I'm going to hand it back. That's all from me, and I will see you all later.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Ben. Hope that's all.
Thanks, Nigel.
Yeah. Cheers. Bye.